PAX, Journey Home, Chapter 12. Sitting on the wide reservoir wall with his legs dangling through the railing steel bars, Peter felt a thrill run through him. From now on, he was on his own. Tonight, this moment, his new life was beginning. He'd felt this way once before. At 7 years old, he'd realized that nothing would ever be the same after his mother died, and he'd been right. But this time, the turning point was different. This time, he was choosing it. It was different also because his future looked better, not grimmer. His future looked like the reservoir before him, broad and deep and full of secret promise. And it looked like the outpost behind him, offering what he needed: food, clothing, shelter, and important things to do with people only as close as he allowed them. He felt safe here from the moment the operations sergeant had shaken his hand in welcome a few hours ago. The ride itself had been hard. He decided not to tell Vola that he wasn't coming back, to instead write a letter when he moved into his old house. A cowardice or a kindness, he didn't know. Over and over he'd glanced at her and realized he'd never see her again, and he'd almost changed his mind, but he hadn't broken. Once she'd said, "I may not feel like family to you, Peter, but you feel like mine. You cannot change that, so you may as well accept it, eh?" And he'd felt his throat swell. He hadn't answered, and that felt like a lie. When they'd pulled into the outpost, she'd advised him again, "Fill your cup whenever you can." And this time he'd understood that she wasn't talking about water, and his eyes had stung. But he'd gotten himself under control and opened the truck door. And then she was gone. As he walked to the end-stake tent, it seemed as if gravity wasn't working quite right. He'd done the camp orientation in a mild daze, a tour of the barracks and the work sites, and a film about the mission. He'd been giving a guidebook about company responsibilities. Everyone did some cleaning and food prep, and tomorrow he was supposed to choose a work unit. Infrastructure, communications, ecosystems, one of those. Now, having eaten and stowed his gear under a cot at the end of a row, his only job was to get to know the other junior warriors, as the sergeant had suggested. It hadn't been an order, though. Peter peered down at the dark water through the railing and listened to the murmur of voices behind him, brightened once in a while by laughter. Just then he caught the surprising scent of burnt sugar. He shifted to observe the people gathered around the fire. Troops, he was supposed to call them. Most were wearing leftover combat gear. They were evenly divided, men and women, and a variety of ages. Peter saw the 3 other junior warriors sitting together, tossing something between them. 2 people, 2 troops, caught his eye. A boy and a girl, maybe 19 or 20, and something about the way they were sitting made him think they were a couple. Peter smelled the hot sugar again. His mouth watered. He got up. He walked along the wall and then down the steps to the ground. There he debated a moment and then decided he would join the circle, but not talk. He chose a log next to the one the girl and boy sat on, because he knew now they were definitely a couple, the boy's hand resting on the girl's knee. A couple would be more likely to ignore him. The girl wore a flowered scarf knotted around thick, dark curls. She smiled at Peter when he dropped down. The boy beside her leaned forward. His head looked freshly shaved, and Peter saw a tattoo on his neck and tipped his hand, then turned back to the fire. The girl handed Peter a bag of marshmallows and the stick she'd been holding. "They were a gift," she said. "People are so generous whenever we go. They're so grateful for getting their water back. An old woman from the last town gave them to us, since Samuel and I are always camping out." The boy, Samuel, leaned back out again. "Jade and I are the advanced reconnaissance team," he told Peter. The woman and her grandson was in the war, and marshmallows were what he had missed most. "People try to give you all kinds of things," Jade added. "Jewelry and mementos of their families who were lost in the war. We can't take anything except for the food." A man began telling about someone trying to give him a horse. Then a woman across the circle began a story about opossums getting in the mess tent, and people started laughing, and Peter let his mind wander, watching his marshmallow cook. He ate it when it was perfect, crunchy outside, but dripping sticky sweet inside. He thought again that he liked how his future looked. He could live like this just fine. But then the girl, Jade, ruined everything. We saw a family of foxes last week. Peter stiffened. Parents and 3 little kits, she went on. They were so cute. Peter wiped his hands on jeans and balanced the stick on a rock beside him. What did they look like? The parents, I mean, he asked, hoping no one caught the tremble in his voice. What did they look like? Samuel repeated. He licked marshmallow off his fingers. Don't they all look the same? Sure, right. Peter drew his knees up and hugged them to his chest. He shouldn't have asked. No, Samuel, the girl said. She turned to Peter. They were across the reservoir, so we were watching through binoculars. But I remember something. One adult had a weird tail, not fluffy, like a whip, as if the fur had been stripped off. Peter's heart quickened. The last time he'd seen Pax, his fox was with a vixen. She had a sharp little face and bright copper fur, but a tail that looked as if it had been burnt. The other adult, he asked, trying not to sound eager, do you remember what it looked like? Sorry, Jade said, and it sounded like she meant it. I was paying attention to those kits. It was obvious they'd never seen water before, and I thought, what it would be like to encounter water for the first time. She turned her gaze to the reservoir, shimmering under the stars. Water. Magic, right? The people in the circle had quieted. They were all listening to Jade now. And then they got into it. They were exactly like us, like human kids, you know? First they seemed scared of the water, but then their curiosity got them, and they started sniffing it, dipping in their paws, jumping back. Pretty soon they were horsing around, splashing in it, knocking each other over. And then they settled down to drink, and I thought, I'm glad it's their first time here, because it's pretty clean now. Pretty clean? Clean enough that it won't kill them. We've gotten out enough of the toxins. All that's left now is to reestablish a biome. She pointed at the bag of marshmallows. Peter shook his head. He couldn't swallow anything right now. It was funny, Jade went on, twisting a corner of his scarf. Samuel and I have been doing this for months now. It's always the same. We come into a place where the water is ruined. We clean it up, move downstream, repeat. You know that besides the people moving back, it means the animals in the area will survive afterward. And that's great, of course. But this is the first time I actually felt it, that it became real, what we're doing. Because of that fox family, I felt like now those fox kits are mine. As if you could own a fox, Samuel scoffed. I had one once, Peter said quietly. He waited for the pain to clutch his throat, tight as a pair of hands. When it subsided, he said, I didn't own him, though. That's not the right word. He knew the right word. Love. He had loved Pax, and Pax had loved him. But he didn't say that word. He was tame. On both sides of him, others joined in, talking about pets they had, moving on. But Peter didn't move on. They were only 50 miles north of where he'd last seen Pax, and 50 miles was nothing for a fox. And how many other foxes had scarred tails? What if it was the vixen and Pax these two had seen? If so, he had a litter of kits now. Peter couldn't help thinking about Pax as a kit. He recalled the moment he'd lifted the ball of fur out of the den. He remembered the fox's heartbeat, fast but strong enough that he could feel it through the fleece of his sweatshirt, against the skin of his own belly. He lifted his gaze to the dark woods beside him, and his own heart quickened. It really could have been his fox the couple had seen. Pax and his family could be living here. He slumped back. Now, every minute, he'd been thinking about his pet. Now, every time he saw movement in the woods, a flash of orange, his heart would lift, and then it would crash. He would run the penance 100 times a day, and it would never work. When are we leaving? He interrupted Jade and Samuel, who were talking together. Samuel shrugged. Most of the company will finish here in a week, maybe 10 days. A week, maybe 10 days, was too long. Some will stay on to reseed the reservoir. Fish, shellfish, aquatic plants. That's usually another week, so 2 weeks from now. 2 weeks would kill him. You said you're the Reconnaissance team. You go first. When are you leaving? Tomorrow, Samuel said. But I'll come with you. I'll sign up for your team. No, you can't, Jade said. We don't take juniors. We're roughing it. I've lived in a cabin without electricity for the last year. I can cook over a fire, use a compass, build a solar still, everything. Jade hesitated for a moment, but then she shook her head. No, living in a cabin is one thing, but the place we're going, it's in some pretty rugged territory. It takes special skills, and we have to travel light. But I need to go. Peter stood up, folded his arms across his chest. Please, I know that territory. I'm from there. I made a trip there last year, starting at the cliffs in the west, through the woods, 40 miles to that old mill by the falls on the river where the troops were stationed, all alone. And no, Jane and I don't take juniors, Samuel said firmly. Alone and on crutches. Samuel and Jade both looked at him. On crutches? Samuel asked. I broke my foot. I trekked 40 miles. I made camp. I scaled those cliffs. I forded that river on crutches. Samuel raised his hand in surrender. Jade grinned. Get some sleep, she said. We leave at dawn.